Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, How Continuous is Your Continuous Testing? Before we begin, I'd like to cover 3 housekeeping items for our viewers. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenters during the webinar, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar, and if we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. Second, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. Third and finally, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. We will also email you a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours. With that, I will introduce our presenters for today's webinar, Parasar Saha, Director of Quality Assurance at SOTI, Johnny Lamb, Head of Global Sales Engineering at Perfecto by Perforce, and Eran Kinsberner, Senior Director, Chief DevOps Evangelist, and author at Perforce. Eran, I will hand it off to you from here. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar.
Thank you, Shelby, and thank you everyone for joining us in today's webinar. I'm truly excited to have with me these 2 great colleagues of mine. In today's webinar, we have gathered so many good practices in how to really accomplish and build an ongoing continuous testing strategy. So I do encourage everyone to stay up until the end, because we're also going to show you a demo, equip you with really good real-life examples of how to achieve continuous testing. Again, I'm happy and excited for this webinar. With me, I have Parasar Saha from SOTI. Parasar, hi, and welcome to this webinar. If you can introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Eran, for having me here. It's a great opportunity for me to be a part of this webinar and to talk about this key topic in the industry. To just talk about myself, I'm the Director of Quality Assurance in SOTI. I come with around 17 years of experience in quality engineering, and I've been heading quality engineering COE and all in multiple organizations, as well as being the enterprise automation architect. I've worked in different domains, airlines, banking, high-tech, pension, and across different geographical locations. I have a deep 360 experience of about how to operate on a organization level, enterprise level quality engineering, considering all the 3 factors, which is the technology, people, and processes. Right? With that, the 360 knowledge, I try to evolve the quality engineering strategy, which helps the organization to accelerate their quality engineering practice. So that's in a brief my introduction.
Sure. Excited to have you with us and allowing you to share your experience. Also, we have Johnny Lamb. Hi, Johnny. Can you also introduce yourself, please?
Hey, Eran. Yes, happy to be in this discussion today. We have an exciting agenda. Today, just working with Eran and Parasar to present the details. So happy to be involved.
Cool. At the end of this webinar, Johnny is actually going to also demonstrate a nice CI pipeline running at scale in the cloud, actually tying back most of the topics that we're going to cover in this webinar. And what we're going to cover today is just a brief looking into the agenda. We're going to give our view of what is continuous testing, just to set the stage for everyone on this webinar. But then walk you through, as Parasar mentioned, the 360 view, or actually how to build a winning strategy that really takes everything into consideration when building this continuous testing and test automation, especially in this digital reality, and how to really measure the success of that. So with that, let's dive in. This definition of continuous testing is taken from one of my books, and I'm happy to be challenged by anyone online. I was actually even somehow challenged by Parasar about this definition, which I'm happy because it means that it really drives the discussion. But basically, the way I look at continuous testing, it's not about measuring the quantity of the tests that you are actually developing and running. It's actually about the value that they are bringing you from a test automation standpoint, and the value is not just measured by the lack of flakiness, but also about how they really allows you to identify business risks upon each code change that you are making. So obviously, continuous testing is driven by test automation, but test automation doesn't mean you need to automate everything. And to run continuously, you need to maintain and prove the value of these tests as an ongoing practice, because otherwise you just dive into the black hole of regression testing, which is just a huge amount of test cases that not necessarily are adding any value, but maybe even hiding some escape defects for you. Before I move to the next slide, Parasha, Johnny, do you see something wrong with this definition? Do you see something different around that?
Johnny, I think, Johnny, you have anything to add? I think Aaron gave a great definition of the continuous testing, and we are at a great start. I truly believe that's really defines what continuous testing is about.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you, Aaron. I think continuous testing is a very relatively newer term that we coined. And really, a lot of people talk about CI/CD, but continuous testing is really that continuous validation, multiple quality gates within different phases of these SCLC, what really greases the wheels and makes sure things are turning.
Definitely. And I think we'll see how good looks like during this webinar and what happens when things actually go wrong and in testing things go wrong. So with that, Parasha, if you want to introduce the automated continuous integration and deployment pipeline.
Sure, Aaron. So I have these two pictures in this slide, right? I wanted to put this picture because I wanted to remind that, this pipeline concept is nothing new to the industry. It is there in the automobile industry. Automobile industry has been using robots to kind of manufacture their product, which is their vehicles, and sending it out, right? So that in concept of pipeline is there for a long time. IT industry is adopting it, and I have this picture, which is at the bottom, which shows a pipeline in the IT industry where you kind of take an idea, create the requirements for it, plan for it, develop it, test it, deploy it, and put it into production to operate, right? So we have the pipeline things which coming into the IT. Now, as we know, like with DevOps, IT has made significant progress in kind of accelerating this pipeline. But still, there are some challenges that is going in the industry, right? The challenges that we see in the industry in the pipeline space is that there is limited end-to-end automation, right? And if you see closely that the 5 boxes, out of which 3 boxes, there is a heavy involvement of automation possible, dev, test, and deploy. But if they are not end-to-end, you will have run into challenges. One of the other thing is, if you look at a test which sits in between, sometimes takes a lot of time, and which actually slows down the pipeline to move faster. Now, if you automate this pipeline, what do you actually get out of it? Let's look beyond testing. Let's look at at the organization level. Let's look at what's the business value it brings you. If you can automate this pipeline and make it faster, you can first have a faster turnaround to the market. You should be able to kind of roll out feature faster to your customer. That's a tremendous value to the business. You should be able to scale up the operational capacity of your pipeline. And definitely all this automation will help you to kind of optimize the cost. But never forget about quality, right? You will have a much better handle of quality over here and be able to higher predictability of the quality. All this together will actually increase your customer satisfaction. As we know, in any industry, customer is the king. And if you make customer satisfied, you can actually fuel your growth in revenue. So there you go. That's the biggest the business value you get out of it.
Definitely, this is great stuff, and I think that's a great summary. Not just about, as you mentioned, the testing and test automation. It's actually how, when you automate the entire pipeline, actually how it improves the entire organizational business values, success, and obviously the customer retention at the end of the day.
Exactly.
And Pasha, what happens when you don't, right? So I took kind of the negative approach after your slide, and what I'm looking here is, okay, as you mentioned in the previous slide, the test falls in between the dev and deploy, right? But if you're not putting the right amount or the right high quality, high value test cases into the pipeline, into your CI/CD, okay, this is about the waste and the cost to your business when something breaks. And here I'm just taking an example of 90% reliability of integration builds. It's just enough for having 10% of your integration builds being broken to see how much money you actually lose, and 900 minutes a week loss, and if you multiply them by your salary to the engineers involved, it's obviously a huge cost to pay, which just means you need to pay serious attention to what you put in the pipeline, how you build your acceptance testing, how you certify your test automation scenarios, just to avoid these broken builds, because it costs you money at the end of the day.
I think, Aaron, this is great data. Data always speaks. This data shows how important it is to kind of make this continuous testing pipeline, continuous integration pipeline the right way. Because if you just build it and you didn't build it right, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your money. So what we're going to take through the next part of it, to look at what should you do to plan it in the right way that actually you get value out of it instead of wasting. Okay. Now, this slide, what I wanted to kind of look at is now that the box that we looked at is the test. But if you actually look closer into that box, right, that box is not just one single phase or one single activity. It is multiple phases inside it. It has multiple phases. As we know, continuous testing pipeline has different phases like test management, code repository, test data, test execution, test reporting, and result analysis, right? And it sits in between your dev checking and your deployment, right? So all these are different phases. Now, the challenges that we see in this continuous testing pipeline is that, there is limited automated integration between these phases. Maybe you have automation in one phase, but you don't have automation connections between the other phases, or you don't even have automation in other phase. So that actually breaks the continuity. So you cannot establish a continuous testing pipeline. You cannot establish a continuous integration pipeline. Now, the other thing which we observe in the industry is that even within one organization, people go ahead and build multiple processes of the same thing. Like they have separate, within the organization, they have separate continuous testing pipelines built with separate tools. So there is a lack of unified workflow in the organization itself. Now, what we can actually think to, like when we want to build a mature model and we want to plan it in the right way, we want to plan the thing that we can have a true end-to-end automated continuous testing pipeline. I want to mention it like true. The reason behind, you want to make sure you can eliminate as much as possible the manual part, right, in the pipeline. Because the moment you put a manual thing, what happens is, the continuity is not there, you cannot run it on demand. Now, the next thing you want to kind of think about is you want to build this pipeline in a scalable infrastructure so that when tomorrow you want to scale from 100 test case to 1,000 test case, your pipeline can scale on demand. the next thing you want to think about, because you have automated the thing, you're going to run it much more often and much more number of execution is going to happen than you are doing in the manual process. And this is going to send you tremendous volume of data to analyze. Number of results coming out. You want to use AI infused operation so that you can avoid manual analysis of these results. Last but not the least, you always have to make sure that you can unify the process in your organization and align to single or as least as possible workflow for this. Now, what do you gain out of it? If you can do it right, you will tremendously reduce your testing cycle. You will reduce the testing cycle, but at the same time, you are going to increase the test coverage. Now that you have automated, right, if you have actually be able to automate the pipeline in the right way, you really don't need always your QAs to run the test tools. You can give it to other teams beyond testing teams who can run this pipeline and get the feedback of quality through that themselves. You don't really need to keep the testing within the testing team. Execution can happen by other teams as well. Now, we always talk about early testing. Now, this that you are being able to kind of also allow other teams to leverage this, they can, like dev can use it. Then you can increase the potential of doing early testing in your projects. Overall, this increases the bar of quality and actually helps you to adopt the quality built-in approach, which every industry wants to adopt. Right? And we're going to talk about that more as we go through, and you will figure out how you can build your quality built-in approach in your organization. So in this slide, we're going to talk about the first phase, test management tool. Test management is a very key factor, where you put your test, the tools you're using. It's a very important factor on your continuous testing pipeline. Historically, what we have seen, the test management tools and the project management tools are two separate tools. What happens then, right? You have one tool where you ask the people to go to check your test cases. You have another tool where you ask the people to go to check the requirements. There's two separate tools. Now, it's always a struggle for people outside of QA to kind of learn a new tool, go and figure it out, and do the thing. And you always feel that people are not interested, right? They don't know, how to use the tool, and they don't have the time. So it becomes a difficult challenge for QA, to give the visibility of testing. So the team beyond QA has limited visibility of testing for having two tools separate. Now, what you do to kind of bridge that gap, you put a manual effort. You put a manual effort to kind of report the data to Excel or different things. And then you create status reports, send out mails. And some people are sometimes asking for your traceability metrics. You go out and manually create the traceability metrics. So overall, you are kind of spending a lot of manual effort to bridge the gap. The other thing you also see in the industry as a challenge is often your continuous testing pipeline is not hooked up to your test management tool. So the test management has no updates what's going on the execution cycle. It just becomes a static thing. Now, what we want to recommend here is try to adopt test management tool which can pair with the project management tool, which is closely coupled and sometimes sits inside. If you see in this screenshot, right, this is an example of one of the test management tool where you have the requirement on the top and you have the test on just below that. So how easy for anybody in the project to go and see the requirement and the test cases easily in the same place, right? Now, that's where we suggest, look for tools who have the integration. Also, when you're trying to figure out tools in that, look for that feature that, where the test management tool has APIs that you can connect from your automation framework. It's very important that the two can talk to each other and you can get a real-time update of what's going on. You also want to see that the test management tool have a dashboard feature where you can have gadgets, which are test status gadgets, which can be attached to your project management gadgets as well, and create dashboard which can show both the project management status and the test management status under one roof. Imagine how easy it's going to be for the teams who can see all the status, whether it's a requirement, or a story, or it's a test or a coverage, everything in one place. And that's the kind of screenshot I have in the bottom part of that slide. Now, what's business value it adds to you? Teams beyond QA will have a huge visibility of what's going on in the testing, and they don't need to poke you. They don't need to ask for the Excels or emails to know the status, and you will reduce the amount of time doing that. Now, the other piece is in the industry, a lot of people want to adopt BDD, and they think, they adopted Gherkins and they adopted everything, but the BDD in the right form. But it is not just the tool, but it is also ways that you actually help the different teams, whether it's a business, dev, or QAs, as three amigos come together and see everything in one place. Like a tool like this can give you the requirement, it can give you the test cases, and if you're doing a checking also through that tool, you can even see the dev things going on. So it brings the three amigos together. Now, because the requirements and the test are in the same place, it's easy to create automated traceability metrics, saves you manual effort. And it's always a real-time update because your automation can feed back through APIs, and that will show up in the stats. So overall, you can achieve the integration and your continuous testing pipeline to your test management tool and help the teams beyond QA to see the test status as it goes.
So just one comment, Parasha. I think that this is a great message, and it's a great requirement or capability to ensure continuous testing. And you mentioned all of the benefits and the features that are required. I think that, if just double-clicking on the BDD example, this is exactly how you keep up with, let's say you have a 2-week sprint, having this ability to tie and connect requirements, user stories to the test cases, to the results, and having, as we say, a single pane of glass for everything that is running in your pipeline really gives you a lot of value and actually makes your daily work much more productive and eliminates waste. So we know that there is this term 7 biggest waste of DevOps, right? This kind of tools really and practices really allows you to eliminate waste in your pipeline and really make you much more productive and also save time, release faster to market. And these are not just buzzwords. This is actual reality. So really good stuff. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, so next let's talk about the data. As we all know how important test data plays into any testing. You go ahead and create a continuous testing pipeline, and you may not have thought about a test data automation platform. And what you run into is a real challenge that you don't have a continuous stream of data creation. What happens? You run your test, you find a lot of failures, a test flakiness that's coming from your data issues because your data was not the right one, or was not refilled, or was not there at all. So now what you have to do is every time you try to run the continuous testing pipeline, you go and fill out the data again, right? And then you have to go and run the test, right? So what it becomes, end of the day, your continuous testing pipeline is no longer on demand. You have to fill out data and you have to wait for that manually happen and then run it, right? So now how you can overcome these challenges? So think about developing a test or data automation platform which is hooked up to your continuous testing pipeline. And when you are creating such a pipeline or you are creating that the test data platform, think about supporting the generation of synthetic data, which is your test data or the fake data. And it should also be able to mine data from your existing databases, like which is in the different environments, or pull data from production to kind of get the data for the existing set. And the other thing to keep in mind here is, like, as we know in test data world, it is easier to create data through APIs and databases and flat file than UI. So keep the option to kind of generate data through those backend processes. But sometimes you maybe have to do it through UI. So keep that option as well. And also build the option that in some cases you may have to have one or more channels to build the data. So have a multi-channel data generation option. We don't have to only do with the generation piece, right? Okay, when you are creating a platform, you also have to think about not only generation, but how do you store the data? How do you log the data that the right tests are picking up the data? And also the data which has been consumed are getting deleted, which is getting purged. Because you're going to be like running this continuous testing platforms, again and again, you're going to be using up the data, and a lot of this data will become invalid over time or being used. So you need to actually clean up that, so you're effectively using your infrastructure and your application capacity. Now, last but not the least, you need to make sure this data or test data platform is integrated with your continuous testing pipeline. And what you achieve through this is you're going to be like having a continuous automated way of data creation, which will monitor what is the test data demand of the continuous testing pipeline and feed that demand. It will reduce your test flakiness coming from your data issues. And end of the day, you will be able to run continuous testing as a really on demand, and you don't have to stop and go every time you are running out of data.
This is great stuff, Parashar, and especially if you are talking about the more advanced and modern applications that are built on microservices and stuff like that. This test data automation and how you generate the data really becomes key to your efficiency and your testing success. So 100% on that. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely. And I always feel that, data and test is like, data is the fuel of your car. If you don't have the fuel, your car doesn't move.
Exactly. And with that in mind, if we just dive deeper and just look at the tests themselves, earlier we talked about the black hole of regression testing and the way you keep running the exact same test over and over again. But as long as they bring you value and they are uncovering new defects, providing you with new insights, this is all good. But what I like about this visual taken from both Michael Bolton and my colleague Ingo Philipp is looking at your application test cases like in this ocean, and you can see the top of that, and this is the risk that about, the test that you actually repeat, maybe as part of your regression, build acceptance testing, integration testing, whatever you execute that is kind of on top of the water, if you like. But look at how many things are below, and these are the things that you either can imagine, things that you have performed and you are no longer running. These are the unknowns in my mind, and this is the risk that you're sometimes taking that either can be uncovered by running more exploratory testing. People would say, okay, continuous testing and manual or exploratory testing, they might be kind of fighting one against the other. I don't think that that's the case here. I think that there is a limit both in time and resources to what you can automate, and you want to actually be more creative and introduce new use cases, new business scenarios that can actually identify maybe your next set of regression tests that you would automate coming from the exploratory testing. So this is kind of a circle of continuous testing that each organization needs to implement as an ongoing practice. you run your regression test maybe each and every cycle. You have a sprint of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it's good. But you also do this exact same exploratory testing in parallel. And if they prove to be very efficient, they can uncover new bugs, you maybe want to automate them and put them on the surface and add them to your build acceptance testing. This is the only way for you to really uncover maybe new risks and maybe higher priority bugs that you might be missing through just running the exact same test over and over again. So I think that this is, connecting back to the continuous testing definition and everything that Parashar was talking about. This is also something that needs to be taken under consideration. And I also think that this slide can actually be a nice segue to really the coverage conversation. Okay, so what do I automate? Where do I run it? And how do I run it? So with that, Johnny, do you want to give us your pitch on how you can cover as many high-value tests within the single pipeline?
Yeah, absolutely, Eran. And we talk to a lot of customers, and in particular, my team, myself, we have a lot of these calls with customers and prospect. And a common theme we hear, and a common thing they want to figure out is, when do I deploy testing in, and what quality gates should I deploy as part of my pipeline to achieve continuous testing? And we typically lay this out as what are the quality gates to focus on, and what are the things you want to find out? For example, if we're early in the, let's say, local dev development environment, we're really focused on providing high-speed feedback. So for, let's say, every piece of code they commit, they want feedback within no more than 5 to 10 minutes. So the quality in here is important, but more importantly, the velocity and the feedback loop is more important. And as we shift all the way from left to right, you see that when, let's say, we run acceptance tests, this is where we want to define a subset of your test, let's say your smoke test per se, and on what devices, on what platforms you want to execute those on. And typically, some of the KPIs you might track in this space is, for example, if you have 1 developer, 10 developer, 100 developer working on it, like what is your overall throughput your pipeline can support? As we gradually shift left to right, when we start talking about integrated tests, we define a sanity suite. So these are important tests, very, very high value. And at this point, we want to have a balance between the feedback loop and also a coverage. So we're talking about a mobile pipeline per se, a mobile app that you're developing. In this case, you would be looking at a balance of getting feedback maybe in 1 or 2 hours, or sometimes even faster every 30 minutes, but also having a good representation in terms of your platform mix. So not only are we testing on, let's say, just one Android and one iOS device, this is where you will look at your data you have from your analytics and decide what is a good representation in terms of my end user customer, what they're using. And finally, we see this as a very important part of that quality gates is to implement a full regression at least once a night. So this is where you look at looking at your customer analytics and figure out what represent at least 50, if not 80, 90% of my customer. You will run the full regression, and hopefully within a nightly 10-hour window, you would have it completed. So when your team come in the morning, you would have a very good set of results to let the team know whether or not the previous build is passing, failing, and any defects they should be aware of.
Awesome. And I think that, what Johnny is talking about here about, the proper way to really build a pipeline from, a coverage perspective early in the cycle up until, you run a full regression overnight actually builds the next slide for us because, the previous slide was talking about how you build coverage from a platform perspective and how you also add more tests, but this slide talks about, which test should I be automating? And this is based on, and there are many practices, and I'm sure that there have been so many different, spreadsheets and recommendations from the market and from industry leaders on, okay, what should I automate so it fits in the different pipeline stages or phases, as Johnny was just displaying. And here you want to ask yourself, and each vertical would be different, right? Because when you deal with, the vertical of finance, over there you have a lot of security and legal and other related requirements that are very specific to that domain. When you are dealing with, the airline industry, you need to deal with a lot of environmental changes, right? People which are always in transit and they are using different devices, different network conditions, and they are getting so many different interruptions. So the vertical also advises on how and what should I automate and use in my pipeline. Here I'm again using something from the financial market, and I'm just looking at the top key features or business transactions from login to bill payment, transferring funds and stuff like that. And you can see here, if for a specific scenario I have the full checkboxes, obviously it means that this is a very critical function that I should be automating, because it's a repetitive one, and B, it's going to impact the entire business if it doesn't work, right? So there are very easy considerations here that you need to make when you're automating. But when you are building the strategy, it's also about, okay, do I have the right skill set to automate this specific scenario? The scope of the automation, do I want to build this scenario in multiple ways? Earlier, Parashar talks about the data, okay? Which data-driven testing I'm going to build for maybe this login function, negative cases, positive cases, irrelevant scenarios, stuff like that. And obviously, it's also about the schedule, the building of the entire environment for testing. If we're talking about mobile, how many devices, how many operating systems, same goes for browsers. So it all needs to come down into a proper and valid strategy, so you really build the right high valuable test cases. If you go back to my first slide about what is continuous testing relies on high value test cases that you repeat over and over again, so they deliver value and reveal the high business risks. This is one way of really determining which test should you automate. Parashar, do you have any comments on this strategy? I know that you have built so many strategies for automation in your life. Do you have any comments or recommendations here?
So, Aaron and Johnny, I think these are great pointers, in QA, it's always good to be conscious about the cost and time factor, right? We always have to balance that. So it's very important for us to kind of balance what you run in continuous testing and what you're running in the manual or exploratory process, right? You do need both of them. You need to have a right balance. And as Johnny mentioned, right, as you kind of understand your customer, as you see their operations in production, take a shift right policy where you understand that data and bring back that analytics in your design of your continuous testing to figure out which one you want to automate, which one you not to. So a lot of these factors actually goes into determining that right combination so you can deliver quality, keeping the cost manageable, as well as you are delivering things faster.
Definitely. And, just one last thing that I forgot to mention, it's also about, how frequent is this feature getting changed, if it's by requirement, it's by environment or something else. If it's something that's going to change so often, it needs to be also baked into your test automation strategy, because the maintenance might be quite expensive for you to maintain. With that, Pasha, let's look at a cloud-based farm for both browsers and devices, and what's your take on that?
Absolutely. These days, the digital channels that the IT exists is kind of expanding enormously. Right? And every now and then, there's a new provider, device provider, browser provider, and there's a new version coming in. How do you manage? That's really becoming a big challenge. How do you manage the testing? How do you manage your infrastructure? even if you look at this thing, right? Okay, before we push out any product to production, we go through so many type of testing: unit testing, smoke testing, integration, regression, UAT, and all of them want to have some level of testing done on different versions depending on where they are. Okay, now your QA team may want to kind of run testing on multiple devices, multiple browsers, because your users are using them, right? But having those infrastructure available for continuous testing is a big challenge. You may want to set up the entire infrastructure in-house, but then again, you run into a high cost factor to maintain it, to set it up. Now, if you don't have it on the flip side, then you are limiting the continuous testing to test for cross-browser and cross-device. So what can be a solution? Here we can adopt a cloud-based browser farm and device farm for execution. Platforms like Perfecto give like a perfect solution for it, because you have browsers and mobile devices which are available on demand. And those devices and browsers are not of just one or two types. You have the whole range of browsers and devices in different OSs and different versions which are available to you on demand. So now with that, you can avoid the infrastructure maintenance overhead, because that is taken care by the cloud provider. At the same time, you get a very highly available infrastructure, because these days the teams are running 24/7 because people are kind of globally distributed. So you want a highly available infrastructure. Now, the value it gives you is you can avoid, by adopting this, no upfront cost of setting up the infrastructure. You optimize the infrastructure cost, definitely. And then you remove that continuous expense of procuring new devices every time there's a new device in the market. The other key factor to also understand here, even if you, let's say, have devices at your office or your desk or something. So what happens is, maybe you forgot to charge up the device. Maybe the network is not connecting. Okay. And then even though you have the device, your test is failing because of different other reasons. But with these cloud providers, you can be well assured that you get a highly available infrastructure which is heavily stable, and your test, if it fails, it is failing because of an application issue and not because of an infrastructure issue. Or you're not running into a problem that you don't have enough infrastructure to run the test. Okay, so the next thing, I think we would kind of want to update the header of this slide. Okay, it was supposed to be like a reporting platform, where what we wanted to kind of mention here is one of the things, this is about the reporting platform that we want to do for the continuous testing. Now, we often generate report which are kind of static report which is saved in the repository. But that only gives you a very silo view of what's happening in quality for your product. Maybe it is only for a project. Maybe it's only for one of the feature of the project. But you don't get the big picture. So what I had in this diagram is, two views. You want to have a reporting platform which is giving you the big picture, where you know all the projects, what is happening in the organization or in a department. At the same time, you should be having the ability to double click on those those individual greens and red and find the details of it as you go deeper into that thing. So you should get a snapshot view and a drill down view as well. The other thing is that, so much data is getting generated as a result from these pipelines. It becomes sometimes like a challenge these days to kind of maintain all these things and store this thing in a long run. So we need to find a solution to that. The other problem of having those static report is it doesn't allow you to see a trend here. It's just static. But you want to see a trend, and your team would want to see a trend, so you know whether you are going in a positive direction or there are challenges there, right? Now, how do you solve this? Right? Okay. Think about developing an enterprise reporting dashboard with the analytics feature, because analytics is very important here these days because you're getting a tremendous amount of data and a number of projects in your organization. As you know, these days, like, okay, even Agile is becoming safe, where it's kind of have multiple Agile team working together to develop a product. So you have several pods inside even one project. Now, that's why you need analytics, so you can drill down, you can figure out different type of filters that you can apply on the fly to kind of see the data. You want to visualize the automation results. You definitely want to feed this automation results into that platform. That platform should be able to give you a trend analysis, very important for you, and should be able to collectively see the metrics in one place. You shouldn't be kind of like opening up multiple reports and multiple places to see the data. It should come under one roof. So what it will give you is it will give you enormous visibility of quality, what is happening in your organization, to the teams across the organization, even with the senior management. So they will have a very good handle of where it is, how it is doing in terms of quality.
Great. And Pasha, since we are close to our demo, I will run just faster on this slide because we're also going to see it in a live demo. So going back to your previous slide about the reporting and the importance of the reporting, we need to be very, very rigorous in what we are looking at, what to search for in a specific test failure, whether it has history, whether it's a platform-specific issue, pop-up, noise, flakiness, and during the demo, you will also see it in the platform itself. But definitely, you want to pay attention to historical things, recurring failures and flakiness, just to make sure that you're not really putting too much noise into your CI/CD. And with a proper reporting platform, as you mentioned earlier, this is exactly what you can gain. With that, let's move to the result analyzer, which is kind of almost at the end of the practice that you recommend.
Yeah, so then, like continuous testing pipelines will actually push out a lot of data, and it's manually quite going to be impossible for you to kind of analyze the data. So you will have test result, but you won't have the bandwidth to analyze. So it's not going to give you any value. To make it effective and get value out of this continuous testing, you need to adopt some AI/ML based defect analyzer module, which can actually classify these errors. And it should reduce the manual effort for debugging and help you to prioritize what failure need to be addressed first. The business value, you will be able to do a faster detection and a classification of issue, reduces your testing and fixing time. And it will definitely reduce the operational cost because your developers and other teams are getting less involved and you can react to issues faster. So we definitely want you to kind of leverage AI/ML based report analyzer. Now, to kind of like develop this platform, right, here is a model. If you are starting from a conventional QA, how you can grow up and build that model of maturity. Now, if you start conventional QA is like, you may say you have a manual testing team with a couple of the automation developer who is creating automation script. Now you want to expand more on automation so you can have all type of testing, that whether it's an API database or mobile testing, web testing done through automation. So you expand your automation testing and align them to a continuous testing pipeline, and you build a 360 automation platform. That's where you create a automate QA. Now, when you develop so much automation, there would be a need for like your infrastructure. And that's where you go to cloud and you create a cloudified QA where you can scale on demand, not only scale the infrastructure on demand, also build a data lake where it can capture all the data coming from QA. Then over there, put a kind of a predictive QA model where you can actually have AI kind of use that data to give you autonomous testing and reduce even more on manual and build efficiency into the process. So, we did all this. So what is going to bring in the organization? So this is a good way to kind of summarize what it's going to bring to the organization. First you start with a QA which was focused on requirement base. Look at it how you can have the QA look at customer use cases. As Aaron was saying previously, okay, the customer use cases need to come in our testing scope. But when you have both the customer and the requirement-based testing, there are so many things to test. Then you bring about a 360 automation platform which can support you to continuous testing as well as different types of testing, API testing, web testing, mobile testing, everything together. Now, once you have automated this, you really don't need to kind of only have testing team execute. Then every other team within the organization can test these things, can trigger this on a click of a button and get a feedback about quality. That's how you bring about the whole QA team model. Once you have the whole QA team model, then your devs and other teams who are before QA can actually start doing this testing and they can get a feedback. And that's where you kind of like come up with the concept of this quality built in where we kind of talked about previously. Then quality is never then an afterthought. You're not waiting for somebody to build it up, give it to you, and start the quality at that point. Overall, what you achieve, quality as a culture rather than quality just as a functional group, where we always say that, okay, we want everybody to think about quality, not just testing team. That's the overall goal of that. And this is your path to go there.
I love that, Parasha. I think this is great stuff. Great strategy and vision. And I think that for organizations that will follow this maturity, you cannot rush and move from one level up until the next without really having the proper foundation. So building it phase by phase as you instructed, as you defined, makes a lot of sense. So I think this is really, really great advices. And with that, I would like to pass it to Johnny to really show us how you can actually, and you mentioned earlier, Parasha, the cloud adoption and running tests continuously in the cloud. So I will pass it now to you, Johnny, to kick off the demo. Do you want to say a word before that?
Let's go for a quick demo in order to highlight and illustrate some of the key points that are covered in this webinar. And in this case, I will be using Perfecto Expense Tracker application to demonstrate a few aspects of what you might be and you should be looking for in terms of a platform. Now, starting off with the code creation aspect. First of all, we want to streamline the code creation as much as possible. And the way that Perfecto handles this is that on top of Appium and on top of, let's say, Appium Inspector, we will provide you an enterprise-grade object spy, which allows you to quickly inspect the document object model or the object tree underneath your application. And you see that once you have a real physical device open, by clicking on the object spy, this will highlight different elements that are available on the screen. And by selecting one of these elements, it will quickly provide you a smart locator, which streamlines what a stable locator might look like for you in your application. And when we think about the code creation aspect, we typically have a lot of time spent in maintaining it, a lot of time trying to figure out a unique smart locator. And this is something that Perfecto will provide out of the box. Other aspects which are important are how do I, let's say, automate an additional number of use cases. In Perfecto, we have the capability of automating some of the advanced use case. Right? So this example that we have, let's say I will log in with a valid username and password, and instead of using just my email and password, I will log in through biometric. So provide the username, password. I'll check off the enable biometric box, and by clicking on login, the next step requires providing a valid fingerprint. What Perfecto will provide is a capability to automate a lot more of these use cases. So by highlighting and using the inject fingerprint capability, I will be able to automate this end-to-end use case on a real physical device. Now, moving on from creation to orchestration, the next part is you have some of these use cases and some of these advanced use cases automated. How do I incorporate this as part of a build? And in here, you'll see that I have a local Jenkins server up and running. And it's really simple to automate and put into a framework. Now, let's say in this case, I'm using TestNG with Java and connect it to these real physical devices in Perfecto. Now, typically, it's a couple line of code change. So if I want to change from using a local grid to a grid in the cloud like Perfecto, I would first of all select which device I want to connect to and highlight through our wizard which capabilities to modify and to include in your script in order to switch from a local execution to a cloud execution. We'll copy this snippet, we'll paste it in our code, we'll update our config file, and we'll start executing in the cloud. And the benefit of doing so is all that infrastructure problem that you have to manage by yourself using, let's say, a DIY lab, that is now outsourced to a cloud grid. All right, so by kicking off this test, you'll see that I'm actually executing quite a few different drivers in parallel. And what you want to do in this case is you want to monitor it. So if you're looking at our live stream view, you see multiple parallel execution happening on multiple platforms, including, let's say, iOS devices, Android devices, and in this case, I'm also validating on a desktop browser. How does that execution look like? And by having this capability, will give you a live feedback of those tests that you are executing and how they're performing on certain devices. So we went through quickly creation of advanced use cases to achieve higher-level automation, orchestration, connecting to a CI framework such as Jenkins. Last of all, once these tests are completed, we need a platform to showcase and highlight all of the results in a single pane of glass. So what Perfecto does for you is we provide you out of the box quite a few different views, including the CI dashboard view, which will provide you, in this case, what you're looking at is every role represents a single job from your CI server. And each one of these bars will represent live what's happening during that build. Case in point, you see that this has been triggered momentarily. It's a parallel execution across 12 different platforms. And this is live, so when you hit the update widget button, you'll see that more tests will become available once it's completed. This will also give you a historic view so that you can go back and see whether or not your tests are stable and if there's anything that is has been regressed as part of your build. And by clicking on each one of these bars, it will also bring you to a drill down detail view, listing out all the test cases, and if there are failures in your tests, we have an algorithm that helps you automatically group together why it might be failing. In this case, we did a simple login and add expense test, and it highlighted that this element is actually not available on a Google Pixel 4. And again, all the artifacts you will need, including screenshots, a video replay, and if you need additional artifacts such as the network logs, accessibility logs, device vitals, those would also be available on demand as part of Perfecto. So that concludes our quick 5-minute demo. The goal is really to highlight a few aspects of what we see as important when you're selecting a platform. And hopefully this will give you a little bit more idea of what Perfecto is able to provide.
Johnny, that was a great demo. I was excited to see the biometrics, and I know how important it is in the COVID world to kind of have those features tested, and also this see everything in motion, right? Whatever we talked about in continuous testing, everything in motion, coming together.
Yeah, thanks, Barsha. And I think to your point, no matter whether it's a startup we're working with, a full enterprise customer working with, biometric actually is very important to every single customer we're talking to, because nowadays security, especially if you're doing e-commerce type of transaction, if you're, let's say, banking online, if you're doing everything through mobile or web, security is very, very important. So the ability to give you that use case and automate that use case of biometric, whether it's fingerprint, Face ID, Touch ID, that is very, very important, and is becoming a standard right now that we're seeing across pretty much every single customers we're working with.
Absolutely, I agree.
Definitely. So with that, this concludes the webinar. So I'd like to thank both Parsha and Johnny for the great content. I know that we ran a bit late, so let's just at least have one question that came from the audience, Shelby, or two, if time permits, but we are really short in time, and but it was good stuff. To you, Shelby.
Sure. Yeah, our first question from the audience asks, how do you see manual testing in this scope of the pipeline?
As I've seen that, we need the right balance. We completely understand everything cannot be automated, and doing automation for everything is not the solution. You want to focus on the high value test. You want to see from your production what is your key high value test, also from a requirement perspective, and then automate those. But also have a piece of it which is kind of exploratory testing, doing manual testing, and the right balance of it. So the focus is to kind of get the right balance and get the quality from there.
All right, and I think we are a little over time, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to ask one more question from the audience. Any others that we didn't get to, we will follow up with you afterwards via email. But that next question is, how do we come up with a unified process in organizations where teams are using different testing tools?
This is a kind of a very typical thing which is happening in the organization. Glad we had this question. There are different organizations, even within different departments, they use different tools for same type of testing. As much as possible, try to align them to one single tool so that it's easier for us to maintain and we are not reinventing wheel. But in some cases, you will run into challenges that, maybe it's not possible, right, to do that for certain reasons. In that case, right, try to consider that as a black box and try to kind of bring that still to the platform, see how you can actually extract the data out of it, whatever you need, and insert the data, whatever you need for that particular phase in the continuous testing. So consider that as a black box, have some kind of API connection to trigger some operations in that thing, and then extract out the data, and then still align the rest of it to the whole workflow that we talked about.
Thank you, Parsha. Great advice, and again, great content. Thank you for joining us today in this webinar. Johnny, thank you so much for joining this webinar and running through the demo. And thank you all for joining us in this webinar. And we are sorry again for running a few minutes late.
Thank you, Perfecto team. It was a great opportunity to present this. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Parsha.